This is not a trail ride. This is a reenactment of the March West that occurred in 1874 after the proclamation by Sir John A. Macdonald that he needed a police force in what is now known as Western Canada. This is going to be a Sunday school class, and we really have to tone it down. All right, start with the marker.
Sound off.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Mindful of the violence that accompanied the westward expansion of the United States, John A. Macdonald, Prime Minister of the new Dominion of Canada, commissioned a force of mounted police to enter into the Dominion's western region. Their mission was to establish friendly relations with the Aboriginal peoples and maintain law and order as the region became settled. On July 8, 1874, the force started their trek from Fort Dufferin, Manitoba. 275 officers and men, split into 6 divisions, headed west toward the junction of the Bow and Belly Rivers, over 800 miles away.
The day we left Fort Dufferin, the column presented a very fine appearance. First came A Division with their splendid dark bays and 13 wagons. Then B with their dark browns. Next C with bright chestnuts, drawing the guns. Next D with their grays. Then E with their black horses, the rear being brought up by F with their light bays. In all, 275 officers and men. Behind was a motley string of ox carts, ox wagons, cattle for slaughter, cows, calves, extra horses, and a host of farm machinery. Our force had a double duty to perform: to fight, if necessary, but in any case, to establish posts in the far west.
125 years after the initial trek west, the RCMP organized a reenactment in 1999.
The first time I heard about this was the Corps Sergeant Major in Ottawa actually came up with the idea as a way of helping to celebrate our 125th, which was in 1998, and preparing for the big Millennium celebrations as well. The March West was an important chapter in Canadian history, and particularly Western Canadian history, and not just for the Mounted Police. So we tried to organize an event that would involve the communities, as many of the communities as we could involve, riding the route as closely as we could follow it from 1874. So we had 3 major organizing committees, one in each province, and in our province of Saskatchewan we had 2 other committees, one for the northern route and one for the southern route. There was a lot of work getting prepared. We had to find a lot of talented people, from farriers to veterinarians to people who could cook good food and keep all these people eating all the time, and how to find people who could help us transport horses. The military came on board and helped us provide camp logistics and some of the tenting that you see here and backup equipment that we just don't have anymore in the Mounted Police. And finding good individuals in the force and outside the force who have experience with horses and in trail rides, and then letting them put together their teams.
I was just complimenting ourselves on what a fine camp it's been, first day out.
Through the journals of Commander George Arthur French and Sergeant Major Sam Steele, we'll compare this modern-day adventure with the original march.
And there's probably 400 participants at Old Fort Dufferin at that time. Everything from wagons to bagpipes to flag bearers to ceremonies going on. So it was quite a ruckus going on with all the horses and wagons and things that had never been together or marched together. So when we marched out of the front gates of Old Fort Dufferin, it was an interesting time. The weather was far from pleasant. We had temperatures about +5 and a good 2 inches of rain on the ground. We had miserable weather probably for the first 30 days of the trek. 27 of the first 30 days poured rain. And when I say poured rain, I really truly mean it rained.
On July 24th, 1874, the force arrived near Roche-Percé, Saskatchewan.
I was reading a book called The Great Adventure, came across this picture, and as soon as I looked at it, I thought, that looks awfully familiar, the area and the erosion in the hills here and so forth. So I brought the picture down here, and everything fell right into place. Well, then we realized that this was the campsite that was where the trek in 1874 stayed here from the 24th of July to the 29th of July.
Here we are on the banks of the Souris River, and just south of Estevan, Saskatchewan. And it was a lifesaver to those guys on that march west.
Well, walking up onto this after being on the trail for 2 weeks with all kinds of irregularities in water, they must have been thrilled.
They had the chance to wash their socks and underwear if they had it, and all this sort of thing. There was lots of grass for the horses, and coal and wood to make fires and so forth. So it was a great place for to stop and give the trek a rest.
They were 275 miles into the trek. They had only covered a third of their 800-mile journey.
The horses were sick and dying. There was sickness amongst the men. The travel was monotonously slow, with the expedition stretching out for miles along the trail. It was here that the commanding officer, Commissioner George Arthur French, decided to split the force.
It is an admitted fact that almost all horses fail during the first season they are fed on prairie grass, and therefore it is little wonder that ours should have failed. Upon reaching the junction of the Souris River and Short Creek, our casualties thus far were 1 horse ruptured, having been overdriven by a half-breed. 2 horses died, one from being worked when on the sick list, the value of which was charged to the officer responsible, and 3 horses were very weak. So we left them on the road. Gentlemen, stand easy. Find a place to sit, gentlemen. I believe we need to discuss our situation. Inspector Jarvis, how far have we come to date?
Sir, I believe we have traveled some 275 miles.
Yes. We left Fort Dufferin on July 8th. Today is July 24th. Our progress has been slow. I was hoping we would have covered more ground. Mr. McLeod, what is your assessment of the men?
Sir, at this time there are 6 individuals listed as sick, although there are a number of men suffering in one way or another. I believe Dr. Kitson has some concerns over the health of the men. If I may, sir.
Speak your mind.
We have 55 sick and almost played-out horses, suffering from a severe attack of epizootic. I'm afraid we will lose the animals if we continue on our present course. I believe the constant diet of prairie grass has not set well with them, sir.
Yes, I have some concern over that. They are impeding our progress. Inspector Jarvis, how many miles until we reach our destination?
I believe it will be in the vicinity of 600 miles, sir.
According to our half-breed guides, the trail gets tougher from here. There is very little firewood, we're not sure of our food supplies, and good water can be hard to find. I have spoken with Captain Shirtliff from Fort Ellis, and I have determined that the area around the fort is much more hospitable. Those men who are weak or sick will not fare well if they continue on with our present course. I have decided to reassign the sick and weaker men to Troop A, which will be under the command of Inspector Jarvis.
Sir.
At present, we are here, near Roche-Percé. I'm deploying Troop A north to Fort Ellis with Captain Shirtliff and his men. Sergeant Major Steele, You are in charge of dividing up the animals and the supplies. Inspector Jarvis, once you have replenished your supplies at Fort Ellis, you will continue north and resupply at the Hudson Bay posts along the way, Fort Carlton, Fort Pitt, and Fort Victoria, until you reach Fort Edmonton. I expect you to arrive in Fort Edmonton in the early fall.
Yes, sir.
I believe that the northern route will be more accommodating in the way of pasture, food supplies, and good water. The trail is well known. I'm told that the half-breed in the Cree in the northern areas are friendly and helpful. The rest of the force will continue on its present course. Do we require any further discussion?
No, sir.
No, sir. No, sir.
Well, gentlemen, I thank you for your attention. Dismissed.
We'll follow the journey of Troop A under Inspector Jarvis as they traveled from Roche-Percé to Fort Edmonton.
Tuesday, 28th. Dividing stores and assorting them. Drew out a number of the wagons for Fort Ellis, Edmonton, and Bow River. Most of the officers and me, who had time, visited the Roche-Percé.
My first trip to this area was in 1937, and the Pierce rocket then collapsed. In '59, we started looking around the country here and surveying the rocks and the other oddities that we have.
And then the junction comes up over here. Short Creek. Short Creek runs in from over there.
This is when I discovered that it was a real place where people had actually carved their history in stone, and a lot of it was done by the Northwest Mounted Police and the RCMP. So you can actually say that their history is carved in stone in the Roche-Percé area.
To the Northwest Mounted Police, an assortment of Ontario farm boys, city-bred adventurers, and veterans of the British Army and the Royal Irish Constabulary, the Métis were indispensable. As guides, they led the force across hundreds of miles of prairie.
They helped them survive in a harsh and unforgiving environment. The Métis knew the land intimately. They knew where to find water and shelter, how to survive thunderstorms and flash floods. They also acted as interpreters, for it was the Métis that knew the people, the natives, the settlers, and the whiskey traders.
Inspector Jarvis headed north to Fort Ellis with 55 horses, 24 wagons, 55 ox carts with 12 drivers, 62 oxen, and 50 cows and calves. Also in the company were 6 men who were sick, Short-Lift's party of 7, about a dozen mounted police, and the quartermaster. When the force split, those going north would follow the well-established Carlton Trail. It's named after Fort Carlton, an important Hudson's Bay Company post located on the North Saskatchewan River. Starting in what is now Portage Avenue in Winnipeg, Manitoba, the trail stretched for hundreds of miles through Portage-la Prairie, Minnedosa, Shoal Lake, and Fort Ellis in Manitoba, Touchwood Hills, Humboldt, Batoche, Duck Lake, Fort Carlton, and Fort Pitt in Saskatchewan, winding its way past Fort Victoria near present-day Smoky Lake, Alberta, through to Fort Edmonton and beyond. This trail was the path linking east and west. It was the only well-tread Canadian overland route between Fort Garry and Edmonton. The trail is known by many names as it winds its way westward: Victoria Trail, Winnipeg Trail, or Fort Pitt and Saskatchewan Trail.
According to Sergeant Major Sam Steele's journal, the trip to Fort Ellis was not without incident. The horses were so weak that they had to be regularly changed.
This slowed the force to 8 miles a day. The cows and calves became so footsore that they would lie down every few yards and needed to be constantly prodded to keep them moving.
We reached Fort Ellis. It was a large fenced enclosure with the usual style of dwellings and stores, and stood on the bank of the Assiniboine about 300 feet above the river, surrounded by bluffs of aspen and poplar.
The force arrived here
at Fort Ellis on August 14th, 1874.
After 4 days of rest, Inspector Jarvis rallied his troops, pulled out of Fort Ellis, and headed to Fort Carlton.
August 18th, 1874. We pulled out from Fort Ellis towards the west, leaving behind us the quartermaster, the sick men, half of the cows and calves, a large quantity of provisions and stores, and several horses which were not in good enough condition to be brought with us.
Hello, Brian.
Hello, Dave.
How are you?
All right. Been a while since we've seen you.
It has been. It has been.
Years.
One or two.
Still looking good.
1999.
Yeah.
Well, this place is a little bit barren compared to what it was back then.
Yeah, it compared to when we first met here.
We had the teepees were set up here.
Yeah, and I was sitting on this side with the.
You were over here, and we had the camp and the picket lines for the horses back up on that little ridge. And then we mustered here, and away we went. That was a good time.
Yeah, prepared for the trip to Duck Lake.
Exactly.
That time, yeah.
Well, let's go for a walk.
All right, go check it all out.
This is the rally location for the northern leg of the reenactment.
We're situated about 8-9 miles east of Fort Carlton, Saskatchewan, on the Beardy's Okimashas First Nation. The participants of the reenactment rallied here on June 28, 1999.
Prior to the June 28th rally, there was a weekend ride at Swan River in the Fort Pelly, Fort Livingston area. Approximately 56 local riders took part in the weekend ride.
Myself and two other members of the RCMP started actually in Swan River, Manitoba. The last week of June, we did a 4-day ride there with the members over there.
It's grown up considerably since 1999. We rode from here into town, and they had a little parade for us in town, and we went and had a little celebration, afternoon tea, if you want to call it that, at the museum. Then they had a big barbecue out here that night. Then we got ready, and away we went.
And we started the following day in Duck Lake to start the complete trek here.
At 05:30, the reveille is sounded, and the membership is expected to get up and get going. Nobody goes around to every tent and say, "Rise and shine, it's time to get going." When you hear reveille, that's your sound to make your move. This is a paramilitary exercise, and there are a few things that are military by nature. At 05:30, you're expected to get over and attend to your horse. That's your most important piece of equipment you have, and every horse is expected to be watered, fed, and groomed. At 06:30, we normally have breakfast. The breakfast is made by our caterer who travels with us every day. We have breakfast, and then at 7 o'clock, it's back, tidy up whatever is loose ends at your shelter, and prepare to move out and be saddled, mounted, and ready by 07:30.
I've been promoted temporarily for the RCMP reenactment to my position as Inspector Jarvis of A Troop. We're reenacting the March West from Duck Lake to Fort Saskatchewan in Alberta. I'm the person that's in charge of the camp. I run the entire operation. We have about 4 other managers that are below me. I'm in charge of the ground operations and all the horses and all the equipment. We have about a 25-man crew here and a self-contained camp, which is like a little town that moves along.
In the reenactment scenario, I am the rank of Sergeant Major. It is my responsibility to manage discipline inside the camp, to deal with any problems that might come up. It's my responsibility to make sure that all protocols are correct, whether it's lowering the flag or placing the picket line or establishing the camp. And it's my responsibility to make sure that logistics are continuously looked after and in place, be it something that I have to physically do myself or whether it's something that I direct somebody else to do.
I'm Constable Dave Young. My job on the ride was as the assistant ride master, the second in charge.
The assistant ride master, Dave Young, is going to warm you guys up, take you for a little ride down the highway here for a mile or two to quiet your horses down and relax everybody.
Scouting party, if you will assume a position at the front of the ride, I will address the ride master that we're ready to proceed. Troop is ready for inspection. Ride master, the troop is ready to ride. Prepare to inspect. At 07:30, we'll strike out, and under normal circumstances, we would travel for 50 minutes, rest for 10.
We have about 40 riders that are going to be leaving with us this morning. We'll be picking up some day riders along the way, and we're looking forward to a pretty good day today. We'll march probably around 6 to 8 miles, and we'll be taking a lunch break at the Wingard Hall. Following the lunch break, we march on to Fort Carlton, where we'll be arriving about 3 p.m. this afternoon.
September 12th, 1874. After 8 long weeks of weary days, we reached Fort Carlton. Here, perfect discipline existed. The offices and stores were neat, and over each door was painted in French and English the name of the store and office, together with the class of goods in the buildings.
Canada Day is going to be a big day. I'll be sending troops to several different locations tomorrow. We're sending 6 mounted riders to the Beardy's First Nations grand opening of the detachment there. I'll be sending 6 mounted riders to the Seeger-Wheeler farm for their flag raising ceremony. We have a pipe smoking ceremony with the Beardy's First Nations elders. That'll take about an hour.
September 19th, 1874. After a week's rest, we pulled out of Carlton. As we left, we were informed that the Blackfeet and Crees were again on the warpath. The country through which we went was a good stock country, but we found the cart trail very rough with roots and stones, and the horses were now beginning to show signs of the long march without grain.
I'm standing on the north banks of the North Saskatchewan River, directly across from Fort Carlton, as you can see on my right. On my left, right down at the river's edge, is the actual Carlton crossing. This point is where the 1874 trek crossed. In 1999, we crossed on the Wingard Ferry about 5 miles upstream.
The operator at that time did a fabulous job in preparing the surface. What he did is he had brought gravel and soil, covered the whole complete surface, and that was for the safety factor of the horses. When we arrived here, many of the riders didn't know what to expect. We had told them the night before that we were going to be crossing the ferry to arrive to our next campsite. So there was a lot of people that were a little apprehensive about crossing. But when we did arrive here that day, the ferry operator was really good. He took me on as a leader of the ride with a few other riders. And the way he operated the ferry itself was really good because he just took off nice and easy, got us across. When we got on that side, myself and a few of the other riders, we left our horses to be looked after on that side. We'd come back over here, assist the people onto the ferry, take them across, and then do the same thing. We'd come back again on another trip and take those people across to the river. It was no comparison, I guess, to what the March West, the original March West had went through when they crossed the river. But it still gave us an idea of what it was like when you arrive at the river and you have no idea what to expect, what's going to happen when you get here. But overall, it went really good for us.
September 23rd, 1874. Game was very plentiful, and the cranes, white wild geese or wavies, were in profusion, with considerable numbers of the grey Canadian goose. Our guns and rifles were kept busy during each halt. Corporal Carr, on one occasion, shooting 11 wild geese with one barrel.
I'm standing on our campsite, the first stop after the Wingard Ferry. The terrain is natural, it hasn't been broken, and it's probably very similar to what they saw in 1874 as they came along the Carlton Trail.
September 26, 1874. The evenings were fine, and the Métis drivers had great fun after supper. One of them had a violin, and to its music the remainder in turn danced a Red River jig on a door which they carried in their carts for the purpose.
The 1999 reenactment arrived here at Frenchman Butte on July 15th. Just as it was in 1874, the weather had turned nasty, and the company slogged through the rain and the mud.
Oh, it was miserable. It was awful. It was raining and sleeting, and the wind was really cold, and we were all soaked, and the horses were soaked. It was no fun. But the countryside was beautiful.
Well, I'll tell you, we got there and we had the Legion Hall to go to, and it was nice and warm, and there was hot chicken soup. But those guys, I mean, they rode through that and they didn't have anything to go to. They were a heck of a lot tougher than we are now, I'll guarantee you. We don't hold a candle to them.
September 29th, 1874. From now on, the trouble with our tired horses and oxen increased. Heavy rains had fallen, reducing the trails to a deplorable state, and the poor horses with the wagons staggered along.
Yeah, 6 years ago, we rode the bottom of this valley. We had to cross bogs, we had to cross creeks. Yeah, I can remember one bog where the horses, they literally sank up to their bellies and had to jump their way through it. That's how deep it was. We crossed a creek, and then we had quite an incline to go up, and the saddle horses were able to get up it okay, but it was very slippery, very rocky. The wagons, we dismounted at the top, and basically we were there to pull the wagons up. It was a good tug. But we rode down through here and around the bend of the river, and just on the river flats a little ways up, we hit Fort Pitt.
September 30th, 1874. The horses suffered much more than the oxen. As the nights became colder when they lay down to rest, the unfortunate brutes became so stiff that they could not rise without help. I had to call the men up many times during the night to lift them by main force and rub their stiffened limbs to restore the circulation. This occurred so often that the men themselves became exhausted from fatigue and want of sleep.
God's half acre. As the shadows lengthened into a purple wave, I gently closed that lonely grave at old Fort Pitt, and there resolved that these first comers shall have title to that scarce half acre of sod, for I will deed it back to God. R. H. Hugum. Interesting. In 1999, the reenactment followed a route that wound through the communities of Blaine Lake, Hafford, Spears, North Battleford, Meota, Edam, Turtleford, St. Walburg, Paradise Hill, and Frenchman's Butte, stopping here at the historic site of Fort Pitt on July 16th. Fort Pitt was a Hudson Bay Company trading post. It was established in 1829 to act as a halfway point between Fort Carlton and Fort Edmonton. The post is located on the north banks of the North Saskatchewan River. This post was an important stop for the original March West as a supply post. It was also an important stop for the 1999 reenactment.
My name's Bob Mills, Robert John, but I live in Regina. I'm 72 years old. My home district is Fort Pitt, Frenchman's Butte, where this leg of the ride is going to terminate. I thought it would be an interesting exercise for me personally, but also for the force and for Canada. And I don't really call it a public relations exercise as opposed to a public interest exercise, because I think the members of the force and retired members of the force have an opportunity to look back, and I think it perhaps gives a little history lesson across the nation on the history of the government of Canada after Confederation, and also the work the force did, and the troubles they had in coming west.
October 3rd, 1874. To add to our troubles, some of the teams would be hours behind the leaders, and we who were in the rear with the cattle and worn-out horses had to stay and help them along.
Before moving on to the Alberta portion of the ride, the troop participated in the opening ceremonies of one of the largest international powwows in North America. It was located here on the Onion Lake First Nation. As you can see, the arbor has been moved to a new location. However, in 1999, this area was alive with historical costume and celebration.
We carried out the south end, as we refer to the south end trek, first, and it wound up in Fort Macleod in the latter part of June of 1999. And then following that, our group in Alberta moved up to carry out the north trek, and a portion of that was carried out in Saskatchewan and by the group from Saskatchewan, and we took over the trek from them at Lee Park, which is located north of Marwayne or Lloydminster, just off the North Saskatchewan River.
We rode into the Lee Park Rodeo Grounds. It's a very pretty area there. And had some ceremonies, and again, First Nations people along with Mounties, new and old, were there. And it was a big celebration.
Well, it's a beautiful day, Al. How are you?
Can you believe it? Hey, Dave.
Thanks for
Hey,
being
Grant.
Hey, Al, good to see you.
Feet you, eh?
Been a while since you saw.
Haven't seen you since I left you here.
July of '99.
Yeah, July of '99.
When we rode in here, I mean, wall-to-wall people, they had a rodeo going on. All the food booths were in operation, campers, tents. The March West was set up there behind us. They had all their tents struck and the gear laid out, the flags were flying. We rode in here in full dress with Brian.
See some bosses? Yeah.
Yes, our guide. He was leading us.
This was the transfer point.
This is where we turned it over, yeah.
We came right into that arena there.
We rode around the arena, did the lap of the arena.
No, it was a gorgeous day, and the ambience was pretty special.
Every place we rode into and rode through, and I would imagine it was the same in Alberta. I mean, it wasn't just a bunch of guys and gals riding horses and pulling wagons and running through your town. It was it was something special, and every place we stopped, they made it even more.
Yeah, you know, it was amazing that all these small towns and little places just swelled to, you know, hundreds and hundreds of people.
Tripled their population.
Yeah, it was amazing.
The farmers and the people along the route would be sitting in chairs at the end of their driveway encouraging us along. And it was just so friendly and felt so good. They're waving their flags, and they certainly wanted to be a participant of some sort.
But we were riding along the road, and this group of people started singing "O Canada" as we were riding by. And I think that was one of the highlights for me, just, you know, the sense of country and all that kind of stuff. It's really, really nice.
Without the support of the communities on the March West, this would just been a ride across somebody's cow pasture. These people in small communities baked pies, cooked turkeys. We ate like kings. They treated us with the utmost respect.
The reason we stayed away from the Fort Victoria Trail, which is really where the first trek was that there was a greater population along the area that we followed, and we wanted the public to understand what was taking place and take part in it as much as possible. Whereas along the old Victoria Trail, the population there is pretty sparse, and the going was a little different than what we ran into here.
Inspector Jarvis and his troop reached Fort Victoria, a Hudson's Bay Company fort, on October 19, 1874. Prior to the HBC interest in the area, a Methodist missionary, the Reverend George McDougall, established a mission here in 1862. He named his new mission Victoria after the Queen.
At last, we reached Fort Victoria, a company's post with a palisaded enclosure situated on a narrow ridge along the Saskatchewan. Before we left Victoria, we made arrangements to leave the cows, calves, and weak oxen there for the winter months.
I guess part of the fun was just to be along with the group as they ride and the wagons, but also to kind of think of what it might have been like back 125 years. It's kind of a let's pretend, I guess, is what it is. And I enjoy doing a little bit of let's pretend.
I was involved in the initial planning stages for the reenactment of the March West. I was asked to provide some feedback, some documentation, some statistics on some of the logistical needs to the organizing committee, so they would have an idea as to the amount of feed needed. You know, an average horse will drink about 15 gallons of water a day under normal conditions, but here we're pushing them, we're stressing them. It's hot out. You're riding them, 15, 18, 20 kilometers, and so there's that need goes up. So we provided some of that detail back to the organizing committee.
November 1st, 1874. We inspanned immediately, and passing over the first dry piece of trail, reached the fort in fairly good time. When they sighted the welcoming roofs, the poor horses pricked up their ears and made a feeble attempt to trot as we moved down the hills. The distance covered by the division since it left Fort Garry amounted to 1,255 miles.
In Commander Jarvis's report to Lieutenant Colonel French, he mused at how they ever managed to accomplish the trip, with weak horses, little or no pasture, and for the last 500 miles, no grain. Because of heavy rains, many streams had become rivers. In the final stages of the journey, they had to repair bridges and construct corduroy roads over mud holes. Some of these roads ran for in excess of 100 yards. The 1999 reenactment terminated here at Fort Saskatchewan.
Fort Saskatchewan was established in 1875 by the Northwest Mounted Police. Approximately 20 men in A Division under the command of Inspector Jarvis built our original fort. In 1885, it became the headquarters of G Division, and there were approximately 100 men stationed here until 1913.
In preparation for the 1999 March West, we had several projects going. Our first one was to erect the 4 corner posts of the original fort site and put up a flagpole so we could have a flag raising ceremony when the troops marched into Fort Saskatchewan.
I'd actually carried a flag on behalf of the Fort Saskatchewan, and brought it all the way from Fort Dufferin and gave it back to the Mayor Ken Hodgins when I returned to Fort Saskatchewan.
To watch the flag rise again on the very same spot that it did was exciting.
The pride that we generated within the whole Edmonton region was noticeable and became a very important part of our history starting as of 1999.
Welcome all of you riders. Welcome the wagon riders, visitors and citizens.
As the troop rode in on July 23rd, 1999, there were thousands of people lining the streets. The parade of riders wore period clothing, and their horses, wagons, and Red River carts were the kickoff to a weekend of celebration and festivities. The following day, a contingent of the 1999 reenactment force continued on to Fort Edmonton.
Right now we're standing at the Fort Edmonton Historical Park. This is 1885 Street, late July of 1999. This was the last day of the Historical March West. We actually rode right down 1885 Street at the far end and continued on through here for another few hundred yards. There was a mustering point where there was a bunch of speeches and celebrations. There was probably at that time 150 to 200 riders, and along with wagons and other people just marching along.
The North Trek was interesting in how it was not a particularly glorious or spectacular point in the history of Canada or the Mounted Police, but to me it really typified Canada and the Mounted Police in how, through their hardship, through in some ways poor decisions on part of the leadership of the Mounted Police, led to this group going. But this group that went north showed how it could overcome hardship of a particular kind, taking the weak soldiers, the weak men, the weak horses, the sick horses, and pulling through anyway. They were clearly never expected to make it. They were clearly never expected to go far at all, if at all. And yet they all made it. They all made it all the way.
One of the reasons I rode the entire way, I wanted to pay tribute and honor the Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers that have gone before me and all the men and women that are still in the Mounties, and also honor the veterans that I think sometimes as a nation we forget too soon what those men did.
It was great for the country, it was great for the RCMP, it was great for the people.
Being a part of this ride, I have to say, has been a very emotional experience. I'm a very proud Canadian, and I'm proud to be part of the RCMP, and I get emotional because this ride has just been wonderful. The vets that have been on it have been just part of it, and the people that haven't ridden for like 42 years and they decide to go on this ride, and it's just been wonderful.
As the core group, were fantastic. They worked together, they pulled together. There were no complaints, there was no whining, no complaining, no nothing. Everybody did their job, and they did it above and beyond what was expected of them. In its entirety, for me to describe what we went through and what we experienced is probably impossible. It was fantastic.
Well, for myself, I really feel honored to represent First Nations on this ride. One of the other reasons I'm on the ride too is to represent the past, present, and future police officers, First Nation officers. Another highlight of the ride for me, I guess, would be being invited with 6 other officers and the riders to go to Alberta to hand the ride over to the Alberta side. That was a really good experience for me. I really appreciate them inviting me along on for that trip.